The program quite yet, but we do have one presenter that's going to go before the main event. His name is David Garcia. He's going to do a presentation today. David Garcia is a cultural anthropologist who works with the New Mexico Acequia Association, and he uses his music as part of his ethnographic studies. David is a great asset to the Acequia and land grant community. He's played at numerous events, and he's always in the community, like I said, sharing his talents with the land grants and the Acequias, and just about everybody else. So I want to welcome David Garcia, and everybody to David.
With your permission, I'm just going to take my mask off a little bit. Buenos días de Dios a todos, todas y todos. My name is David Garcia. I'm from yo soy de la comunidad de Huache que queda en el condado de Río Arriba. I'm from Española Valley, a little bit in Río Arriba County. And I came today to talk about kind of what there's oftentimes thinking about different movements, political, social movements. And oftentimes there's not movement if there's not music and art and culture as a part of that. And so just kind of gathering together, I'm going to, the kind of 10 minutes that I have, I'm going to talk to you guys about corridos that deal with the land grant movement. And also, I composed something today so you guys know exactly how these sorts of things come about. So I started writing a little bit as people were getting here, and I thought, let's see what this sounds like. Vinimos hoy a Carnué el día 15 de octubre pa platicar de la ley, la importancia de costumbre de la acequia y la merced. So what that was, I was using octosyllabic verses quickly to kind of describe what's happening here today. And that's what people have been doing in New Mexico for generations. It's a tradition called, we had in a lot of communities, poetas, men or women who wrote historical ballads about what happened in their family, in their community. And I've come today to kind of to play, each day I'll play today and then I'll play tomorrow, two pieces that reflect the movements dealing with land grants and acequias. The first one I want to sing is a song that was composed by Roberto Mondragon, the former lieutenant governor, who was a major convener in the land grant forum. And talking to him, this past weekend, he's doing fine. He just turned 82 this year, and he said, I asked him, well, would it be all right if I sang your song? He said, pues, con todo gusto, David, pues, tienes licencia. And that's what I ask you guys also, if I have your permission to sing these songs for you. So this first one's called Nuevo Mexico Hasta Cuando, and you have the words, the translations in your packets. It was first sung for the commemoration of 100 years of the signing of the Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1998. There was many corridos that were composed for that event, for that commemoration. This was just one of them. And what Roberto did is he took a verse that was very well known here in New Mexico that said, it's a verse that kind of, it goes back to the period in time of Mexico, before Mexican independence. It's actually a verse that was circulated throughout New Spain that said, Triste América, ¿hasta cuándo se acabarán tu desvedelo? Tus hijos midiendo el suelo. Your sons, y los ajenos mamando, no? Here it changed a bit and became, thinking about the extranjero. The context of el extranjero is the Mexican-American War. So in terms of thinking about who the foreigner in this corrido is, it's talking about the American intervention in the loss of half of Mexico's territory in 1846 through 1847. So that's who he's talking about when he says el extranjero usando tus hijos por los suelos. And this talks about the resistance, and it's often a song that's sung on February 2nd, which is the signing, the treaty day that we mark here in New Mexico. Nuevo México, ¿hasta cuándo durarán tus desconsuelos? El extranjero gozando y tus hijos por los suelos. Año de 48, era en el siglo pasado, en el pueblo Guadalupe, un tratado fue firmado en el estado de Hidalgo. Sucedió en un día 2 de febrero señalado de 1800 siempre que el tratado fue firmado en febrero señalado. I'm going to skip over the choruses just so you get all the song down. En la plaza de Las Vegas, Carney lo había anunciado, ni un chile ni una cebolla ha de resultar dañado, Carney lo había anunciado. Pasa una mujer en llanto, no nos apena ni tanto, que un chile y una cebolla es lo que van a echar la olla, no es ni un chile ni un cebolla. Nuevo México, ¿hasta cuándo durarán tus desconsuelos? El extranjero gozando y tus hijos por los suelos, Nuevo México, ¿hasta cuándo? Se publicó La Razón porque se uniera la gente, pronto se fueron juntando. Aquí lo tengo presente, se fue uniendo a la gente. Y ahí se fueron internando allá por la capital, los extranjeros pensando que entregará el morral, solo alzaron las manos allá por la capital. So these next verses, 7 through 8, talk about the resistance that occurred during 1847 through Taos, Mora, and Mudo, Santa Cruz de la Cañada, where they fought the American troops. Santa Cruz de la Cañada, el Embudo, Taos y Mora formaron la resistencia de la cual hablamos ahora. Santa Cruz de la Cañada, el Embudo, Taos y Mora. Quebrantaron el tratado, con las tierras se quedaron. Cuando les dimos la mano, el brazo nos arrancaron, con las tierras se quedaron. And then finishing up these last verses, it says, yo quiero hacerles saber, no somos gentes amantes de dar el brazo a torcer, sean enanos o gigantes, yo quiero hacerles saber. Estos son nuestros terrenos de las Mercedes cabales, ya sea del BLM o florestas nacionales, esos son los Mercedes cabales. Celebrar nuestra cultura, hablar siempre el español, reclamar los terrenos bajo la luna o el sol, bajo el sol y la luna, hablar siempre el español. El día 2 de febrero hay que juntar nuestro esfuerzo, que no haya necesidad. Que se canten estos versos, hay que juntar nuestro esfuerzo y que se canten estos versos. Hijo, ¿hasta cuándo durará tu desconsuelo? El extranjero gozando y tus hijos por los suelos, y tus hijos por los suelos. Nuevo México, ¿hasta cuándo? I'm going to try to do an abbreviated version of this next corrido just because of time. But this next corrido that you have in your packet is called El Corrido de Rio Arriba, which marks a very important part, a shift in the politics of land grants in New Mexico during in the midst of the civil rights movement. This corrido perhaps is probably the most widely circulated corrido about Tijerina and the courthouse incident. And so what I would like you, if you have any questions about any of these songs, feel free to come and talk to me afterwards, and I'd be happy to share all that I know about these ballads that I've been learning and sing. And so this was composed by an Albuquerque native, Roberto. Well, he's originally from Mora. His family spent a lot of time in Denver as they were part of the movement there with Corky Gonzalez and the Crusade for Justice. Roberto came to Albuquerque and quickly started recording many, became a very well-known corridista. And when this came out, after the moment of the courthouse incident in '67, almost within the same week, this corrido was recorded. It was put on the radio, and when Tijerina was eventually arrested, the prisoners of the prison were already singing this song in the prison, just to show the extent of how these popular narratives, they circulate and they tell somewhat of a different story of resistance than possibly the newspapers. They are themselves a public, and there's also very many different versions of corridos, even of the Tijerina, of that incident, which were published in many different Chicano news sources such as El Grito del Norte. So, but this one was recorded and played on the radio during those days. Año de 67, 5 de junio fue el día, hubo una revolución. Oficiales del Estado, su venganza ellos tomaron. Su jefe les suplicaba, no debería haber violencia, pero no les controlaba, pues perdieron la paciencia. Un diputado en el suelo se queja con agonía, con una bala en el pecho. about this corrido, it ends with the verse kind of in the kind of a subjunctive mode, saying, this corrido ends when justice, that we arrive at justice. And so it's very, it's asking us to have, it invokes us to do something, to move towards justice. And so, este corrido termina cuando se haga la justicia, para que no se repita allá en Tierra María. Thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here with all of you, learning and sharing discussions about the land rents and Acequias. So I'll see you. I'll be here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Before we start, there's one last thing that we wanted to do today. We lost a dear person in our community, and I'm hoping that David, if you wouldn't mind staying up a little bit longer to talk about Dr. Anselmo, if you don't mind.
I wanted to ask if probably I got to know Anselmo, the late Anselmo Arellano, probably about 15 years ago as a part of a theater group. We went to visit them in Las Vegas. He would often invite us to take our theater group there to Las Vegas, New Mexico. He was from Springer. He was a historian who wrote on many different topics. He was a historian, probably a better person, because he was always filled with knowledge of the past, and he would share. He was a storyteller to the degree that he would inspire you to look further into issues about culture and history. And I want to just ask everyone, he wrote quite extensively on acequias and land grants. He in addition wrote about New Mexico newspapers. And so I would like to spend a second here, if we can have a moment of silence, hold a moment of silence in his honor. And after that moment of silence, I'd like you all to join me in saying presente, as we often do in our communities, because they're here with us. I'm going to be saying Dr. Anselmo Arellano, and I'll say presente, and if you guys can say presente with me, that would be very appropriate. So I'd like to hold a moment of silence now for Dr. Chemo Arellano. Dr. Anselmo Arellano, presente! Presente!
All right, well, welcome everybody. David, thank you so very much. We really appreciate it. David will be back with us tomorrow as well, so we'll get 2 days of entertainment. Thank you all so much for being here. It's nice to be here with a lot of old friends. And quite frankly, this event is long overdue, centuries in the making. And hopefully it'll be the beginning of a new trend of better attention being paid to land grants and acequias by the legal community. So my name is Adrian Oglesby. I'm the director of the Utton Center at the UNM School of Law. And okay. So I wanted to thank a handful of folks as we get started. In particular, of course, what a wonderful way to start a CLE. The gentleman from the Land Grant Studies program has done a tremendous amount of work in preparation for this, and they're going to have you drinking from the fire hose all throughout this event. David Benavides we should probably just call this the David Benavides show. You're going to be hearing a lot from David, gleaning a lot from his wisdom. We really appreciate that. Enrique from the Acequia Association, and Paula will be here a little bit later. we're going to hear a lot of really good stuff from them. Many thanks to the Attorney General for making time in his schedule to be here with us, and Novella Salazar is here as well from the Attorney General's office, I understand, so there you guys are. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And as always, I wanted to thank the folks helping out, Charlotte and Stephanie in the back, and Lauren Rust, who checked you in, has done so much of the heavy lifting for today. If you guys have any sort of technical questions, grab Lauren. She'll have the answers for you. So a few little housekeeping items. We've got extra masks if you guys need them, so feel free to help yourself to those. We've got hand sanitizer, of course. We've got food here for you guys today. We're going to have burritos from Golden Pride in the morning, and then we're going to have sandwiches from the tap room next door for lunch tomorrow as well. So only rule with the tap room is you can't bring alcohol from the tap room into the conference. Drink it before you get here. So there are some CLE packets up there. We've sent out a link to all of the presentations, so you guys will be able to access all of that stuff from your computers. And so we'll ask you to hold on to this packet for tomorrow if you need it then. Other housekeeping things, if you have questions for the presenters, we're going to have some index cards and some small pencils. We'll collect those from you guys maybe 10 minutes before the presentation ends, and then we'll hand those off to the presenters to answer them. We'll keep those on the registration table, but if you don't want to get up and go back there, just raise your hand and one of us will bring some over to you. The bathrooms are out the door to the left. There's some lights outside, so you'll see them there at the end of this little hallway here. I think that's pretty much it for the logistics. The agenda for this afternoon is going to be great. Manuel and Dr. Baca are going to be exploring the evolution of land grant law here in New Mexico. It's a fascinating presentation. We're going to have David and Paula give us a little history on how water was managed before the prior appropriation doctrine was imposed on us here in New Mexico. Something that I think is important for all of us to know. David is going to give us another presentation on the impacts of unethical lawyers on land grants. As many of you know, the history of land grants is largely the history of bad actors in the legal profession, and it's something we should all be very aware of. With that, would you like to introduce yourself?
Actually, I'm going to introduce myself.
Oh, let's do that.
Someone else is going to introduce me.
Okay, got it.
But good afternoon. My name is Manuel Garcia Griego. It's my honor to be here in the role of Director of the UNM Land Grant Studies Program and Principal Investigator of the Mexico Land Grant Council. Both of these organizations, among others, the Law School, Consejo, and others are sponsoring this event today. I would like to join my comments with Adrian's in the sense of this is long overdue. I'm glad that we're finally doing this. It's really important to keep in mind that land grants and Acequias were joined historically together as one, as part of a single unit. We will be mentioning that when Dr. Jacobo Baca and I will do our presentation later. So Adrian has already given you a very sketch of the overall sketch of the program. So with that, I'll leave it and turn to whoever is introducing the Attorney General.
I think it's up to us right now.
So it's up to us.
That's right.
Well, the Attorney General. I mean,
right.
he doesn't need any introduction.
I don't think he does at all.
I think the one thing I would say though is that very few people in New Mexico state government have recognized and appreciated the institutions of community land grants and Acequias in New Mexico, as has Hector Balderas. So it's for me a genuine pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Novella can join me, and Dr. Nal, would you come sit with me as well? And then Dr. Al Jesus Lopez, come and join us here on the side here. Get a few more chairs.
you know, to Dr. Garcia, Adrian, Oglesby, and many of you are all friendly faces that I've come to either work with or come to know personally. And so those introductions are much too kind, and it really is an honor for me to be here and contribute not only as the Attorney General, but to bring a great team of what I would consider faces of the important issues impacting Acequias and land grants. And so really on a personal note, I think it's important to understand my cultural upbringing that really has driven the policies and the politics and really in essence the street fight of what has developed into the modern landscape of Acequia and land grants. And I really, from the humble beginnings of Wagon, New Mexico, neighboring that old Mora land grant, and I come from the Vigil family, really that initial beginning of those experiences in my life in northern New Mexico really have defined the way I look at power, natural resources, and the law. And so for me to be participating in just a CLE with a rich community like this, it is a personal honor for me to be here, not a professional one. A personal honor to share a few remarks about what I see as the landscape surrounding Acequias and land grants. Of course, I don't do this job by myself. I'm an Attorney General from a community that only has 150 registered voters. So clearly other communities had to weigh in that process to allow an attorney from Wagon to become the Attorney General of Mexico, and it's a shared community all around the state of our values. And the only reason I use those numbers is to give you the significance of why it's such a personal honor for me to share a few remarks here today on this important issue, because we don't elect an Attorney General every day from these very rural communities. And that's my gratitude back to our community of activists and our community of families that have struggled for hundreds and hundreds of years. We accidentally elected an Attorney General. And I say that and I open my remarks with that context because it relates to what the Treaty of Guadalupe division was when I came on into office. And it was a division in law, but had no staffing and no resources. And I became Attorney General in 2005. So for me, that was the first deficiency that I had recognized because of my personal upbringing, that what are these land grant communities and Acequia communities receiving in terms of service when only in name in the statutes there are no professional staffers, and the legislature has not committed one staff person to these important issues. And to me that was an atrocity. And it's not like we all got together and decided to say, we're first going to elect an Attorney General that will staff the Treaty of Guadalupe division, and then there'll be a plan in terms of what that staff does. We accidentally did that because of my personal opinion. I recognized that we have a division. Where's my team when I took office? And there were no resources committed to that effort. So there have been some great accidental impacts that we have made as a community, and that's just one that you wouldn't know unless I share that with you as an anecdote today, that in 2015, New Mexico, as rich and diverse as it has been with our history, and we have a $6 billion budget every year, we had never staffed the division. And you were never told that it was really being unstaffed. And to me, those budgets are a sense of what our priorities are. So, first anecdote, many more to come in my remarks, and then I will want to introduce you to this panel, and then I want to close with some of the other amazing things we have done. So let me give you the landscape. I first want to thank this great collaboration. I can't say enough about the UNM Land Grant Studies Program, the New Mexico Land Grant Council, the UNM School of Law, Natural Resources, and Environmental Law Clinic, some of the voices we've already heard from. They're the pioneers and the real organizations. We at the AG's office sometimes just get to carry the sword and the shield, but a lot of times we're not the intellect behind these engagements and complicated issues to engage in a street fight. It's these great organizations that are our partners. And so I want to thank them not only as sponsors, but really the drivers of our intelligentsia in this community, and that we now have resources to partner with them is an exciting opportunity for our next generation. So we know the history. Cultural heritage in New Mexico runs very deep, and New Mexico is unique, not only in this country, but in the world. Spanish and Mexican land grants, our Mercedes were obviously established in our communities from individuals and communities from the Spanish crown to the Mexican government. And these communities date back to 1600s all the way to 1800s. And these communities have historically carried the responsibility of maintaining farming, ranching, and other traditional uses necessary for survival. The Treaty of Guadalupe the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the actual treaty, which ended the Mexican-American War in 1848. Really, that's significant in terms of a milestone, because our land ownership continues to be based on a rural, communal system that contrasts even modern today with, is different than other private property ownership interests. I would argue, in my own attorney general way, with my wagon mound legalese, that it continues to be one of our most challenging mysteries in explaining our values and our property ownership as it contrasts with other private property interests. And it is one of the most difficult political equations to explain that mystery to lawmakers and other stakeholders. And for me, it's one of the talking points or one of the areas of interest that I think the solution will be in our next generation of leaders in this community that's able to solve that mystery, that's able to grasp the real essence of where our authority and our value set come from. When I say Mexican and Spanish authorities, it's much more a beautiful mystery that we still haven't quite been able to mainstream among other institutional power. That's my own takeaway. Acequias as well in the state of New Mexico are some of the oldest water management institutions in the United States and are integral to our way of life in New Mexico. The Treaty of Guadalupe recognized the importance of these acequias as a century-old practice. And in 1851, the territory of New Mexico passed its first water laws. Again, I make the note that we still have not mainstreamed an understanding of that mystery of those water laws with our other shared water users. But these community ditches bring water to agricultural fields across northern New Mexico and also present centuries-old traditions and some of the most sustainable uses of water in the world. But again, I speak to many of the millennials and many of the generations that are much younger than us. The Acequia and land grant communities are essentially the experts in climate change, and the experts should be at the table of discussed solutions in terms of how we're changing our natural resources management to combat climate change. They really are the climate change experts, yet don't often get recognized as such. The land grant communities and also the Acequia communities have also developed, in addition to a great cultural heritage that is the backbone of New Mexico, they also represent a rich history in activism in defending those traditional water uses and land management practices. And I'll give you another good example today. I'm litigating right now against the state of Texas and the federal government for the entire Rio Grande ecosystem. And it was legislators that were worried about my aggressive litigation posture early on when I took over the office. And I think the reference was that, you know, no matter how much money we give you to sue Texas and the federal government, that ultimately it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, is how the reference. My lawmaker buddies were slightly intimidated to take on that legal fight in the United States Supreme Court. Well, when you're from Wagon Mountain and you're the first lawyer to ever come out of that community, you tend to develop a different understanding of what a street fight looks like. And my position was that it didn't matter how many resources Texas and the federal government commit, whether we're out-lawyered, but that we have to out-lawyer those bigger organizations, and that we would. And that in criminal litigation and other civil areas, that New Mexico has been a world leader in that street fight because of how I was influenced in watching land grants and Acequias litigate and fight for those rights that go back hundreds of years. And so right now we're literally in a trial against the federal government and Texas on a greater water crisis that we're experiencing. But I can assure you that the legislature and Texas and the federal government were surprised when I countersued Texas and the federal government for actually stealing water from the state of New Mexico. That it wasn't just Texas that was being harmed, but it was actually New Mexicans that were being harmed. And I can attribute that aggressive litigation posture from the way that I saw a lot of the ancianos advocating, always being under-resourced, always being the underdog, but yet were seemingly very effective. And that cultural history of how I litigate comes directly from Acequias and land grants, and was surprised to see the legislature so passive and ready to roll over in signing that agreement. Well, that is a way of life for all of us. Every ounce of water and the way we maximize land management, that's a survival instinct. That's not a legal strategy based on who has more lawyers or who has more money. So, hence back to the Treaty of Guadalupe agreement that then created the Treaty of Guadalupe Division, which is a division in our AG office, which both balances cultural heritage, but tries to stay in touch with the land grants and Acequias, and we try to partner with you all on what should be the next generation of legal fights that these communities take on. And I would argue that it's tragic that we first staffed that division in 2016. So imagine from the Treaty of Guadalupe all the way to 2016 that we as a community finally have our own legal voice and legal division, that it took that long to organize an official division in the AG's office is something that at least we remedied. The Treaty of Guadalupe Division's role in providing direct services and support to land grants has grown significantly, and the landscape is going to further change. Land grant issues remain very vexing, complex, and mysterious, and claims under new or continued ownership of ancestral lands are a top priority for us, but they're very complicated. But through statutory language, we have been allowed at the AG's office to assist land grant Mercedes, and the Treaty Division continues to pursue resolutions like encroachment on historical common lands. And most recently, this past legislative session, the Office of the Attorney General was in full support of changing the Treaty of Guadalupe Division statute to include provisions that would allow our office to provide more direct legal counsel and assistance to the Land Grant Council, to work with the Land Grant Council to identify legal assistance issues on the land grants, and also assist and give more equity into the definition of, we all know that land grants are political subdivisions, but what does that really mean? And we wanted to have an impact on what political subdivisions could do to improve their way of life. And ultimately, we now are attempting to assist reviewing and responding to election contests filed with the Treaty of Guadalupe Division, and ultimately trying to assist the land grants to meet compliance of inspection of public records and a whole host of other governance regulations that land grant communities have to comply with now in the modern era. Additionally, the OAJ, we've not rested on just land grants. We have assisted New Mexico Acequias and continue to recognize that the Acequias face similar challenges as the rural land grants, and that gradually the Treaty of Guadalupe Division will start and has begun to explore other issues that are affecting these communities and come up with creative solutions. For instance, the theft or public safety issues on the land grant communities. Law enforcement communities are not always responsive as they should be to some of these communities as they are to other subdivisions like municipalities and other county governments. So we have our hands full in essence, but it's based on recognizing the cultural heritage and the history of land grants in Acequias. It's also based on recognizing the human rights and civil rights and the history of activism of these families that have used not only these natural resources as survival, but are now part of the evolution of New Mexico culture in where do we go next as we make laws and as we distribute taxpayer resources. My hope is that the land grant community voice and Acequia voice will become more powerful and empowered in the other now institutions of power like the New Mexico legislature and how we interact with law enforcement, the federal government, and other stakeholders. In my small speck of experience as the Attorney General, I believe we have a lot more work to go, and that's ultimately one of my conclusions in the landscape. But it is very exciting because what I inherited versus some of the street fights we've engaged, we've experienced some supreme victories because there is a narrative that can often be overwhelming and frustrating for our communities, but we have had some successful legal victories, and that's what I'm the most proud of, is to show a small impact on this great legacy and cultural history in New Mexico, impacting these very special communities. So without further ado, I'd like to recognize Jesus Lopez, to give him a few minutes and defer to him in my remarks, to talk a little bit about where the Treaty of Guadalupe Division embarked in two legal issues that I thought were a direct recognition of the land grants and the Acequia way of life. And I'll let him, he's much more eloquent than me. The only thing I will set up is that both of these legal victories contained the characteristics of the street fight, that the rule of law and these institutions of power and treaties mean nothing if they don't have an impact on day-to-day families and also of making a nominal improvement in our way of life. So, Jesus, if you could take 5 minutes to talk a little bit about the, oh, go ahead, let's give Jesus a round of applause.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I didn't expect to say anything here today, and I thank our good and great Attorney General for inviting me just a few moments ago to say a few words. My name is Jesus Lopez. I've been practicing law in New Mexico for almost 45 years. I was born and have lived my entire life in Las Vegas, New Mexico, in San Miguel County. And just for 1 minute, I want to tell you how important Las Vegas is, to follow up on what David Garcia just mentioned in one of his Corridos when he mentioned Las Vegas. It was in Las Vegas that Stephen Watts Kearny first announced the conquest of New Mexico in 1848. Las Vegas was the first settlement that Kearny encountered as he marched into New Mexico. And he was later going to take the entire Southwest for the Anglo-American people of the United States, as you all know. But it was in Las Vegas that he arrived on August 18, 1846, with 1,700 troops, 1,700, 500 provision wagons, 2,000 mules to pull those provision wagons. And he encamped on the highlands of Las Vegas, where Highlands University is now, looking down at what was then Las Vegas, which was just the Old Town Plaza, right next to the Gallinas River. And he mounted his cannon, hundreds of cannon, down into the settlement. And the people awoke in Las Vegas, including my family, we were there already, to this incredible force that was staring them in the face from the highlands in Las Vegas. And he marched into Las Vegas. He arrived there as a colonel, Stephen Watts Kearney. While he was there, he received word through a courier that he had been promoted to brigadier general. So it was in Las Vegas that he became a general. The next morning, he marched in on horseback down from the highlands, crossed the Gallinas River into our Old Town Plaza, and there proclaimed for the first time the conquest of New Mexico and the entire Southwest. He marched then to Tecolote, 8 miles from Las Vegas, and made the proclamation for the second time. Then he marched to San Miguel del Vado, another 10 miles, and made the proclamation for the third time. And 3 days later, on August 21, 1846, he marched into Santa Fe with those 1,700 troops, 500 wagons, and 2,000 mules, and raised the American flag, and proceeded to take over the Palace of the Governors, and slept there that night, blasting cannon fire all night. We had mounted, my great-great-grandfather was the governor at the time, Manuel Armijo, and he had mounted a defense, an anticipated defense against Kearney at Cañoncito at Apache Pass. You know where that is? Right there by Glorieta Pass. On those hills, he had mounted a defense with about 1,200 men, some cannon, to fight Kearney, to stop him, because they knew he was there. But we thought that our weaponry was so antiquated, and we were so outnumbered, that if we mounted a fight, Kearney would march into Santa Fe and massacre the population. For that reason, Governor Armijo decided to disband and allow Kearney a peaceful entry into Santa Fe from Las Vegas. Interesting stuff. I thought you'd find that very interesting, but I have very little time. Thanks to Hector Balderas, we recently prevailed in a very significant lawsuit involving the Tierra Maria land grant. The Tierra Maria land grant, let me back up. In 1989, people of the Tierra Maria land grant staged a protest on 220 acres there in Tierra Maria that were very significant symbolically for the people of that area. And it became a national event covered by all major newspapers in the country. And the reason they did that was because that particular piece of property was very symbolic of the thievery that Thomas B. Catherine had engaged in when he stole the entire Tierra Maria land grant, most every other land grant in New Mexico. So they staged a protest. They filed a lawsuit in the federal district court to retrieve that property, to take it away from a corporation out of Arizona. And they prevailed. And Richard Rosenstock, who still practices law in Santa Fe, was their attorney at the time. He was a very activist attorney, as you know, and was able to retrieve the 220 acres for the people, for the community of Tierra Maria. Well, they got it. It was big news for the benefit of the community. They held on to it till 2003, when some folks out of Colorado also took the land grant away. And so they had been dispossessed for almost 15 years, maybe more. and it was Hector Balderas in his office that retained me as a special assistant attorney general to get that land back. And we litigated the case for a year and a half. Novela helped us very much from the Attorney General's office. She runs the Guadalupe Hidalgo division of the Attorney General's office. And Hector he committed a great deal of resources to that litigation. He reached out to me, and he committed his heart and his spirit to that litigation because it was so symbolic. It was just 220 acres, but the symbolism was incredible. We litigated the case, and I think our position was so powerful that they folded. We settled the case for nothing, and they turned over the land to the land grant, and the land grant, the Ave Maria land grant, now has a warranty deed to that property again. Arturo Chuleta, who's standing back there, was a great asset in that entire litigation. I thank you again, Arturo. And I'm so happy to hear for the first time today that Arturo's at law school, because I told him 10 times, you gotta go to law school. And he is. They're going to have a celebration tomorrow, coincidentally, in Tierra Maria to celebrate what I just talked about, okay? Do you want me to take any time on the White Street case?
No, we're running out of time. So, but that's a good example of some of the legal victories. So let's give Jesus a round of applause. So let me just close, because I think we're given the 1 minute here. Dr. Ricardo Galeanaya and Lorela Salazar are part of the faces and the passion that will carry on this work when I'm gone. And the landscape of these communities, for me, is bright among all the hardships and challenges. But today, sharing legal education and awareness, and more importantly, setting goals for the next generation, truly make this event remarkable. And I really want to thank you for allowing us to be a part of it. And secondarily, what is so strategically important, and I'll close with this, it's the strategy that would make a powerless community like Wagon Mound, with 100 voters and no legal warriors in those communities, to go on to the highest office and then take on other national issues involving our natural resources and our public safety and privacy and technology and suing Google, and the sky's the limit. My hope is that this CLE and these community gatherings strengthens us to be more strategically tactful, so that we pass the torch to our next generation of legal leaders, so that we can continue to empower and fight for our way of life in land grants and acequias. And for me, that is also the other personal gratitude that I have here, is I've got my eye on who the next generation of legal leaders will be, both to honor our legacy and our history, but also to continue to protect our way of life in our future, so that when they say New Mexico, that we are part of the political, legal mainstream. And that's what the CLE means today for me, and that's a strategic opportunity, not only for our history, but for our future. So thank you for having us. We can give a round of applause to my panel here. Good luck with the rest of the CLE. Thank you. I'm sorry, I went 2 minutes over, I think, so.